Okay, so big business and social value. We're 2 years on into the Social Value Act. I think today we want to talk about what's changed over the last 2 years. For those social enterprises in the audience, we'd like to understand from you a bit later on, has your engagement with the private sector changed? Has the dynamic changed in terms of actually you getting supply chain opportunities or joint venture opportunities with private business? For those who are from private business, perhaps you're contracting with the public sector. Actually, how has that changed for you? What are the challenges that we're still facing, and kind of what needs to happen to make things easier? And what are the barriers that kind of we're all facing? So really kind of very kind of open debate, and kind of want to make it as practical as possible. One of the things that I'd quite like to try and do, this might not work, but we'll have a go, is that I'd quite like for the social enterprises and also the private businesses in the audience, if we can start actually kind of from your own experience as we start having discussions, if we can maybe kind of be tweeting some top tips for engaging across sectors, so actually kind of how social enterprises are kind of best winning, or charities are best winning business from top business and big business, and actually vice versa, actually how big business is engaging with social sector suppliers perhaps or partners.
No signals down here. Can't tweet down.
Oh, so that definitely won't work then. Absolutely, I think that's confirmed. Apologies for that. Let's move. Let's move. Say again.
There is a Wi-Fi code.
Oh.
Event with a capital E, 293.
Event with a capital E.
N2.
N2.
Sorry, 293.
293. Okay. All right. So let me introduce our speakers. On my far left, we have Paul Buchanan. Paul is Executive Director responsible for business in the community's work on communities. He's worked at BITC since 2001, and he's also a member of the BITC Executive Management Team. And is very passionate about the role of business in creating more resilient, vibrant, and successful communities. Outside of BITC, he's chairman of the Boxing Academy in Hackney. And then also he's trustee, which we have an interesting conversation about, of TECHO UK, which is the European arm of TECHO, which is a not-for-profit organisation mobilising youth volunteers to fight extreme poverty in Latin America. Next to him, I have Andy Fontana, who's Business Unit Director for Local Government at Interserve. I'm going to read some of what I love your. Andy's always said that when he grew up, when he left the army, he was going to leave the army. So that must have happened some 13 years ago. And actually, kind of not just, but how did he get from there to here? Not just the second Social Value Summit. He was also at the first.
A few.
Me too. I've got the golden ticket. But being involved with delivering social impact from business perspective. In short, after leaving the military, he continued to work in the defence sector and got into facilities management. Now a chartered surveyor, he's been working for Interserve for over 6 years, and I will let him explain the rest of his role to you. And on my sharp left, I have Mick May. Mick is founder and chief executive of Blue Sky Development, an award-winning social enterprise with a difference. And you will have heard this before, I'm absolutely sure. They only employ ex-offenders. Blue Sky Development provides proper jobs to ex-offenders, aiming to break the cycle of reoffending and challenge perceptions about reoffending, achieving real and long-term benefits for society. He joined the social sector in 2003 with Groundworks at Thames Valley. This followed 20 years in the financial service industry, culminating in board positions in both banking and asset management sectors. So you bring lots of different perspectives.
I've committed lots of crimes.
Okay. So, without further ado, Paul, would you like to kick us off?
Thank you, Kate. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much. God, this is going to be a long slot, isn't it? No, it's going to be great. It's going to be fun. I have got northern dulcet tones, but I'll try and keep them undulating so you don't all fall asleep on me. I'm going to only speak for about 10 minutes. If I go on much longer, kick me, because you probably all will be asleep. Who are BITC? Well, we're a charity. We're a membership organisation. We have about 830 members. Work with about 2,000 businesses, mostly big businesses, people like Interserve. Majority of our members are big, those big companies, so majority of the FTSE 100 are our members and those types of organisations. There are about 500 employees operating in about 30 sites across the UK, and we manage a global partner network of about 120 global partners in about 80 different countries. Now, I'm going to start by just giving a little bit of context to BITC, because we were actually born in 1981. Who can tell me what happened in 1981 in this country? Toxteth riots, well done. So the riots happened in 1981, and actually what a variety of business leaders, Marcus Seith, who was the chief exec of Marks and Spencer's at the time, and Alistair Pilkington from Pilkington Glass, actually with Heseltine and various other business leaders, actually went out in the communities and said, what's going on? And the big thing they understood was that the issues that were faced in our really inner cities were not just governmental problems. They were actually business problems as well. And actually the heart of that conversation led to a phrase that still lives very strongly in BITC today, and that is, prosperous back streets will lead to prosperous high streets. The two things are intrinsically linked. If you're going to have good business, you need to have good society. And that is the very founding stone of BITC. So what do we do now? 30 odd years on. Well, we help companies, our members, in a variety of different ways. We help them think about their environmental impacts, whether that's around water, waste, or energy. We help them think about their workplaces. How do we make sure that they're vibrant, diverse, and healthy places for people to work in? And we also help them think about their license to operate in the local community. So thinking about their approach to working in schools, their approach to tackling long-term unemployment, or helping support young people into work, or supporting enterprise and social enterprise into supply chains. Or really, how do we help the fabric of our local communities to be as effective as possible? And how do businesses do that? And what's the business role in doing that? And how do they make sure it's relevant to the business and relevant to the communities? And how do they make sure it's integrated into the communities? Which was one of the things I thought was fascinating, listening to your boss this morning from Interserve, talking about how they integrate the capital issues into their business. Why do I tell that story about where we've come from? Well, over 33 years, what I believe, and I've been there 13 odd years, what I believe is that BITC has been helping companies think about their social and environmental value. That's what we've been doing, their social impacts. So actually, the terminology we talk about now, social value, I think is good. It helps to bring new life and energy to the conversation. But this is a conversation that we believe BITC has been having with our members for a long time. And this brings new light to it, but it's not a brand new conversation. And we shouldn't lose that history in the conversation. But as the new conversation is dawning on us, and has been over the last 2 years, and probably before that, last 5 years, as Social Enterprise UK have been campaigning to get this into an act, BIC absolutely endorse it because it brings that new energy to the conversation. One of the things that when we talk to our members see themselves, and when we talk to them about social value, and not all of them understand it, but when we do talk to them about social value, and we talk to them about their impacts, we say, how do you put your arms around social value for you as a company? And most companies do it in two different ways. And I'll put to one side for a moment the mapping exercise which you're doing, and Kate, you're involved in, which I think is a fascinating, could be quite the innovation, and it could be quite a landmark piece of work that's going on. But at the moment, our members see when they think about understanding their social value in two main ways. And one is when they think about in a local area, and they think about it in terms of a business unit or a contract that they need to win, so their business unit. And they say, well, actually, for their business unit, can we put our arms around the impacts that we have in that place, the social, economic, environmental impacts we have in that place, and can we measure it? And one of the organisations who I think is absolutely brilliant at this stuff is Anglo-American. Okay, because they've been doing it for years. It's just the way they do business. Because when they think about opening a mine, and they think about the community footprint they have in that place, they undertake a really intrinsic and detailed social economic assessment tool, a SEAT tool. Because it's absolutely essential to their business that they understand what their impacts will be, and how them being there, how they can manage and measure those impacts. And actually 20 years hence or 30 years hence, when they leave that place, they can tell the story about how they've improved the wealth and the social well-being of that place. You know, so a company like Anglo American have been thinking about social value and been able to put their arms around it in a very local place for a long time. And part of the reason about putting their arms around it is because if you look at a local place, you can put your arms around the metrics, the educational attainment, where employment comes from. You can really look at the very clear metrics that you can have an impact on. Much harder when you do it across geographies. But that is the other way that companies do. So I said 2 ways. Second way is companies trying to understand their total impact. And the reason I say total impact, one of the tools out there, probably I think is a leading tool at the moment, is PwC's Total Impact Management Measurement Tool, which basically tries to put a number, a financial figure, on an organization's impacts. And a key part of that is their social impacts. Now, when I look at the tool, I think it's a fascinating tool. It's a really impressive tool. It's taken a long time to develop, and I think it's quite an expensive tool to run. So a lot of companies, there's a price barrier to entry on it. But it's still difficult for companies to compare each other through the tool. And partly that is because there's so many proxies and assumptions that go into it. And so companies have to decide, and there's some proxies that you can get from hubs and things like that, the social value portal where you can get some proxies, but actually there's still a choice, and companies choose the proxies they want to make. And so it becomes very difficult to measure one company against another, never mind a company from a totally different sector, a supermarket to a construction company, to a telecoms company. Their impacts are so different. It's very difficult to get that comparator. So where the value comes, I think, is much more about how companies can compare themselves at the moment to themselves. And so when a company thinks about its social value, and part of my brief for speaking today was actually, if they can compare against themselves, it starts to inform the decision making. And when you can start to inform your decision making, because it's got social, environmental elements to it as well as economic, it makes it much more powerful. But we're still not there yet. So, BIC, as I said, we welcome the increase in debate over social value. We do think there needs to be much more clarity of what it means, and part of the lack of clarity, I think, I had a session, a person who runs one of our leadership teams, we're business-led, and we have these business leadership teams, about 15 senior business people who set our agenda. And Richard Howson, Chief Executive Crillian, leads one of them, and he sort of owns for us the social value agenda. And we asked around the table with the other 15 business people, Fujitsu, Lloyds, others, Manchester Airport Group and all sorts of businesses, what social value means to their business. And everyone said something very different. But all of them talked about their approach to corporate responsibility. I think social values should be a little bit more than that, but at the minute it's not. And I think at the minute it is that. So when you ask social value, they all think different things. And they can't really articulate one articulation of it. And it was talked about on the platform this morning what the articulation is of social value. But if you talk about social value to a lot of business, and I speak to a lot of different businesses, ones who are members of us, they start to roll their eyes a bit when you say social value. It's just too amorphous, it's too over there. And so for me, the Social Value Act has helped bring it into focus a little bit more. It brings a purpose to it, particularly of those obviously who are procuring with government, and they're the ones who are really ahead of the agenda in thinking about this. But I do worry about whether it's going to really land. It talked about it lacking teeth this morning, and that's my big thing, is whether there will ever be the teeth that it needs to have. And what's going to give it teeth? Probably a legal challenge. Will that legal challenge ever present itself? I worry that it hasn't done so far, and so I'm hoping that it will in some ways, because that will be the type of thing that starts to give it teeth. And I think it needs teeth. My other worry about the Act is that, and I think about companies who are working with local procurement officers and local government, Who's met a local procurement officer in local government? I'm not going to ask your views, but they're under huge amount of pressure, these people, and they're very focused on how they're going to make sure they create the greatest value, and the social value agenda hasn't dripped down to them. Some places it has, probably Croydon, Durham, maybe Oldham, Birmingham, but not many places. And so how are we going to get to those people en masse across all the different government departments and all the different local government associations? I think that task and getting them to change their thinking and their way of working to take this on board and to really understand how to do it is a massive exercise. I don't think anyone's really... There's bits of work going on with the LGA and others. Social Enterprise UK have started some good work on that. But I think there's so far to go in it. And I worry that the act will have sort of dissipated into the ether by the time we get there. That's one of my worries. Am I okay for time?
Yeah, 2 minutes.
2 minutes, wow. I thought I was going to be done in 10. Listen, I was asked for two things. What's sort of the demands for advice from our members? What do we see as some of the demands for advice? They ask for clarity from public procurers, and particularly at a local level. What are we going to be compared on? And how are we going to avoid the frustrations around the Social Value Act when it drives certain behaviours? And I heard one example of a construction company who had to let go of an apprentice because it wasn't an apprentice that would fit the criteria, because it wasn't an apprentice that they were recruiting from one local authority area to another. And so they had to let it go and recruit another apprentice back from that area. And it's just like that sort of local behaviour can drive some very wrong behaviour. And so we have to have an ability amongst all the way of measuring this to be quite pragmatic in how we think about a company approach to make sure that it's not too localized. Companies have to also think globally. They want that measure, how to demonstrate, and often they want to think about how you monetize social value, and we're quite a long way from monetizing social value. And when I talk about monetizing social value, I think the social value debate is probably where carbon was 20 years ago in some ways. And so And we can't afford to be 20 years before we really get a way of measuring and trading social value. And so how are we going to get social value accelerated and take the learnings from how we've dealt with carbon and to get that monetization of social value? Some of the big challenges, 3 quick ones. I think one of the things that we found through some of our members is that when you look at local procurement through the Acts, and local authorities thinking about social value and how they interpret it, it's quite difficult for some sectors to talk about, especially if they don't have a presence of people in a place. If you think about insurance or professional firms, like Zurich, I think, are in the building today. When Zurich are talking about how they sell insurance to Birmingham, or whatever it might be that they're selling to Birmingham, but they don't have any people there, how would they articulate the social value they create? And, so we have to make sure that we don't bar people from procuring just because they're not in a place. We have to think quite intelligently about how we actually think about social value across some of those boundaries we talked about. There's desperation for more guidance and consistency. And we talk about consistency, and it drives me potty that there's 2 hubs going on at the moment, Social Enterprise Hub, which we're supporting, and then there's also another one that Hazel Blair, who's coming later, is talking about, the Social Value Portal, and they're trying to do the same thing. And we've already created, in quite a small space, 2 competitors looking at how we talk about the metrics that we might use in terms of social value. So we've got to make sure we remove some of that inconsistency from the system at this early stage. And the big challenge for business, the final one that I'll leave you with, is that businesses aren't asked enough about this. So the biggest challenge in making social value really land in the business psyche is for them to be asked about it more, and they're not asked about it enough at the moment.
Thank you very much. And if you want to tweet, now start asking if you have an internet connection, obviously. Paul, thank you very much. There's some interesting points that we can pick up on there in discussion later. Andy, just picking up on something Paul said around actually defining social value. You know what I'm going to say.
Straight in with the questions.
No, it's just as you kind of talk about Interserve's experience and Interserve and Landmark, it'd be really good for you to tell us actually how does Interserve see social value.
Okay. you want me to go now? So
Yes, please.
can I
Thank you very much.
stand? It's all right. This stage is a health and safety nightmare. So if I fall off the edge or kick the monitor over, I'm very sorry. And for those of you watching the live web stream in Australia, well done. It's now, whatever, 2:10 in the morning. You're probably in your pajamas. Look, I intend to speak as indeed I sing, using no real notes. So it won't be necessarily as structured as my learned friend on the left. But I want to just tell you about my personal and Interserve's big business, if you call us that, journey. Because people ask, what's in it for you? And that's a perfectly valid question. And I will answer you as open and honestly as Adrian Ringrose, or Adrian Ringroll, as he was actually introduced earlier on today, which I shall call him in the future, so I may not be here much longer. You know, we like to be a very open and honest organisation and explain why we're involved in this space. As Kate said, my first career was in the army. I emerged at the age of 8 years old from the shrubbery in my parents' garden, carrying a toy machine gun with my face covered in mud, and said I wanted to join the army. And then I followed that on with, when I grew up, I'm going to leave the army. Did that and made my way through various companies, large companies, Kellogg Brown and Root, a KBR Carillion JV, and ultimately into Interserve. And got involved with the facilities management, which I knew nothing about before. And I'm going to muddy the water even further now by saying we've used the term social enterprise, social value. The way that my mind frames what I'm about to talk through in terms of journey is social impact. And social impact can be positive or negative. And we do ourselves a disservice and we run a risk if we keep talking about social value and we get in our heads this is all a positive thing we can do. We can make mistakes and we can be driven to behaviours that deliver negative social impact. So we want to be positive in that impact. So where do we start the journey? Back with Landmark, I was responsible for, and if you've been upstairs, you'll see some of their literature. We run 1% of the UK landmass, look after all the defence training estate, have 21 million trees, 2,500 sites of special scientific interest, loads of stuff like that. And we look after all those little army training camps, the swords you play in West Down Camp, Senny Bridge, those little wooden hutted camps that you occasionally see in the distance as you drive through. So we look after all those too. So it's a big facilities management operation, and it also includes a rural estate. And I sat down there with the Landmark team, we were going through rebid, and this is the bit where I'm totally open and honest with you, and we were up in competition with KBR and Babcock, and I can use those names and I can tell you how we beat them, hurrah, because I'm sure none of them are watching. Oh, perhaps they are. It was, what's our unique selling point? What are we doing differently? And nobody could really answer that. And then Matt Roberts, who some of you may have come across today, came in and said, well, look, there's a thing about social value, about social impact. And we started to look at, we got involved with SE UK and Kate as well. We had our first report done on what social impact with the way was being generated by the way we were conducting our operations. Could be positive, could be negative. And we discovered lots of things. You know, we worked in really rural areas, and therefore we employed people in those rural communities. And in some cases, we're the major employer, and we brought skills into that community, and clearly we brought money into that community. And it was a symbiotic relationship, because if we chose a different procurement route, and we bought stuff in, and we bought skills in, then we would end up paying more, the carbon footprint would go up, and the rural community would die, or wouldn't have the skills there to sustain it. So that was kind of a bit of a ground opening, and we found that actually in a lot of the way we operated, we were creating a positive social impact. The next problem was our procurement organisation, the Defence Infrastructure Organisation, part of the MOD, we've got this great USP. Brilliant, we want to talk about it. We've done a report on it, it's fantastic. There was no way of them measuring or evaluating that. The whole competition was driven on compliance, past the tick boxes, price. So we got into a very interesting period of competitive dialogue, trying to socialise what we were doing and the benefit we brought. And there was an added value opportunity put in there where we could talk about this, and we did. There was still no real measurement of it, but we were successful. So, yeah, that's good. The trouble was, being successful on a lower price means that, well, what drives price in a facilities management company, do you think? People, materials, subcontractors. Subcontractors employ people and materials, clearly. We've now got to deliver for a cheaper price. What do we do with all these staff that live in these rural communities who are about to say we need to cut 10, 15, however many percentage out of the workforce? Negative social impact. And I appeal to anybody who's involved with the public sector now, what you are going through and are going to continue to go through as some people are doing, the race to the bottom in terms of price. Absolutely understand why. Huge savings targets being levied will have a negative social impact if we're all not very careful. How do we get around that? Well, there were obviously redundancy payments that had to be leveraged. We put some of our people through a mentoring program so they could help and support people who were leaving. We tried to have just volunteers. We tried to put them in touch with sources of funding, and we set up our own fund for people who wanted to either start their own small social enterprise or local company in the area. So we did everything that we felt we could do reasonably to help our staff transition out into the workplace, doing a different thing if they wanted to, into having their own company, if that was the route they chose to go, or into retirement, which some of them wanted to do. And we were sort of selective in our voluntary process to make sure we ended up with the right skills match. We tried to meet the needs and the wants of the individuals, and we tried to support them through that. And we tried to mitigate against the negative social impact. And if that isn't a consideration that you had when you entered this room, it should be when you leave. If you want to save money, particularly in facilities management, staff, materials, which get bought from somebody who has a business, subcontractors, you want it cheaper, there's going to be negative social impact unless you're very, very careful and smart in the way you do it. So, back to the open honesty bit, we started off with the head. The head says, Social Value Act coming, we need a unique selling point, we better do something differently, and we did social value, and we measured social impact. I had a part, as did Matt then, in bringing this back into Interserve, because Landmark is a joint venture, 51% owned by Interserve and 51% owned by an American company called PAE, Pacific Architects and Engineers. So we wanted to bring this back into Interserve because, again, with the head, what's Interserve's USP? In 5 years' time, when hopefully a lot of these measurement metrics have been sorted out and we're standing there having some services procured and people say, well, what do you do in the social value space, the social impact space? What have you done? How have you measured it? What can you bring to the table? What can you show us? And by the way, it's 30% of your overall marks. The head says, let's be in a place where we're ready for that question. When you start to do this, the heart takes over a bit. And at the moment, sometimes, being open and honest in Interserve, Adrian, who's here today, Tim Hayward, our head of finance, Matt Roberts, myself, we are pushing something uphill because to make this really work in big business, what are you going to do? You either hit people or you incentivize people. Similarly, our clients will either measure us and hit us if we don't achieve certain targets. So there has to be a cultural shift. And I believe that a cultural shift can only happen when people get it. They need to get it with the heart. They need to go out and see the impact of their operations, the social impact, positive or negative, to really get the whole piece. All that happens at the moment is we've done some work on social capital mapping. We've tried to find out where our people live. Do they live in the borough? Can I go to Croydon, who we provide a service to, and say, look, do you know, this is the value of the spend that the staff I employ in your borough have available to them. That's a measurement of sort of social impact, social reinvestment. Perhaps I can employ more staff in your borough, which is a fantastic metric. And I've kind of lost the train for why I was using that metric. So anyone feel the point I was trying to make? Anyway, so we've got all these powerful metrics that can be measured, but in the same vein, negative social impact will occur if I have to downsize that workforce, if I have to be more competitive. So how do we find a way through? What's the big business approach? We big business needs to be driven through the head first, in my view. Then we need to see the heart follow. The head needs a reward. I love biscuits. That's, my wife actually says I'm half Labrador, because whenever there's a biscuit in the house, I manage to snaffle it. But the head needs something. The head needs something to think about. They need some sort of metric. They need to see that scoring model in the bid or something like that. And then the heart hopefully will keep following with people really the buy-in side. Where do we see ourselves in the future? Where we selves? Where, that sounds like I'm from up north somewhere. Where do we see ourselves in the future? So we want to get to a place where we have an offering. If you want to buy Interserve, I'm only saying this because I'm confident Mr. Babcock and hopefully Carillion aren't watching either, or KBR, but we want to come to the door and say, when you buy Interserve, you buy a whole package of things. And that is because we have job fit, we have working futures, we have a social value or a social impact proposition, we can deliver you a social capital map. And when we go out and we look at where we employ staff, we are making joined up decisions, which we're not making at the moment. So one example, I have a young graduate who works for me, who we recruited as part of our graduate program, which is fantastic. 2 years, they get a job with us, and hopefully at the end they carry on that relationship. I look after the University of Sussex, but I didn't get a graduate from the University of Sussex. So we need to join up the thinking so that my client base, our Interserve client base, gets a package from coming with Interserve, which is about social impact. And if there's negative social impact, with the way that we need to meet the client's demands for budgets, we need to be able to explain how we manage that negative social impact, because you avoid it at your peril. Finally, are we seeing that sort of buying behaviour in the marketplace? Absolutely not. And you mentioned some names of different organisations who are, ahead of or about the game. People are making very simple decisions around price, and I understand that. It's absolutely understandable. And they're making very simple decisions around how they see social impact positive in their community, i.e., I'm going to bundle this all up and I'm going to use a local supplier. I use local suppliers. The people I employ live locally. Actually, with my buying power of my supply chain, I can ask my local supplier to set up a depot in your area. And with the power that I have, and I have used this power, I will ask them to set up an apprentice scheme for a storeman, stores and distribution apprentice in their depot in your area. So why am I any different? Why must we push down to small suppliers? Actually, big business, following on from Adrian's point of view, is sometimes seen as bad, and sometimes that's not quite justified. However, I want to get on to Q&A. Sorry, you will get a go. But because there's lots of social enterprises here, and one of the things we need to focus on is how we wrap them into our supply chain. Adrian's talked about that too. So if you can't deliver services directly, how do we support you with being part of our supply chain? Because I see that as hugely powerful. At Landmark, we shifted the paradigm by changing the procurement rules. So because it was a self-contained entity, not a rather larger corporate as Interserve is. So we changed the procurement rules. We joined Social Enterprise UK. We advertised on the website. We got the download of all the social enterprises around. And we said that we changed the pre-qualification questionnaire process to make it simpler. And we said that wherever we got like and like, direct comparisons, broadly, who's up, who's down a bit, there's nothing in it, we buy social. Why wouldn't you? For that, there's a bit of interrogation of the social mission and how that organisation actually operates, but we can do that piece of work. So very interested in engaging with more social enterprises. At the first look, and the market has moved on in the last 2 or 3 years, we couldn't necessarily buy the sorts of services from social enterprises that we wanted to. We could find lots of people, and there's no disrespect to anyone in the room, at that time who were selling boxes of chocolates, hand creams, stuff like that. Very few people that could provide equipment, heavy machinery, stuff for hire, materials, consumables that a facilities management company might need. That is changing now, which is positive for us to see. That's me with no real notes. Hopefully it wasn't too much of a rant, and I look forward to being challenged with some questions, because I saw a few people nodding their heads, I saw a few others shaking their heads, so come on. Okay, thank you very much.
Andy, thanks very much. And so
Did I
Mick,
answer your question, Kate?
absolutely, no, you
Amazing.
did,
All
you
right.
did. Not necessarily my question, a question for the audience.
They're all wanting to ask it.
Last but not least, from the absolute coalface of social value, we have Mick May, who's founder and chief executive of Blue Sky Development. Mick, if you could also start by telling us or at some point in your speech, what social value means to your organisation.
All right, I'll try and do that. So I have a reputation for being somewhat irreverent. If I haven't proved that I am irreverent by the end, or if I haven't given you any tips which would help you engage with big business, then I've failed. So tell me. And if I've been condescending and an old git, I've failed as well, and tell me. Okay, so we take our name from the Ballad of Reading Gaol, which is the finest piece of literature written about what actually happens to people in prison. What not many people know is that the person who is hung at the end was a soldier. We have a very, very simple operating credo and a very simple model. It's jobs, jobs, jobs. Why? Because a proper job cuts the probability that someone will reoffend by about 50%. And we set it up with and the credo is incredibly important when we set ourselves up, because we said it has to be a proper job with a proper company. This is not a training exercise. People work. And not that you don't on training exercises, but it means that we have to win business from the private sector, which means that it's really good for our people, by the way, because they know that they are winning jobs which the private sector has either subcontracted or competed for. We don't give any discounts for ex-offenders, and I regard a job as an escalator to a better life. I don't regard it as the ending point. Here you asked me about creating social value. I think it's what I would call, this is who knows about cogeneration, combined heat and power. It's really simple. You take two very simple things, natural gas and water, and you shove out two things that you can sell, heating and electricity. And I think we should be doing the same thing. So we provide market-priced recycling and maintenance services. I've chosen our top local authority client. It's by a long way not our top client, which is two very large businesses. But we also sell, and we're hoping to do a lot more of this, independently evaluated reoffending services. It is an interesting statistic that because the people we help pay tax, they're proper employees, we're actually paying the government something like 150 to 200% of what they pay us to reduce reoffending. So we've got it right, but we've got it too right. Here's our payroll sizes and trends, okay? So we are actually, and we've suddenly shot up in size, which actually coincided with the time I went off on long-term sick leave. But we've shot up in size, and I think the reason we've shot up in size is two things. I think it's because we know how to approach big business. Challenge me on that, but I'll show you how we do it. And it's because I think the Social Value Act, so I'm going to challenge you both actually, I think the Social Value Act has changed the way that big companies look at particularly local government procurement. So we've now employed over 1,000 ex-offenders for what that feels like. That's the size of a big prison, all right? I used to have dark hair when I got into this business. That's what it feels like. Employing over 100 ex-offenders on your payroll at any given time is quite demanding, but huge fun. That's our commercial income. What we call commercial income is nothing that gets paid to us except to deliver waste recycling or grounds maintenance. So, and that is growing. And for reasons I can explain, we think that the limit on its growth is not the commercial appetite for us. just so you've got a feel for that. We're actually worried by how much we're growing at the moment. We're mad about impact evaluation. We've done it all. I first got into it because I used to sell dodgy financial instruments to people, and when you do that, you always want to tell them what their return on investment is. I see it as return on investment for a local community. So we've done SROI. We got a private econometrics firm to do a special number on us, and the Ministry of Justice has something called Justice Data Lab, and all of those show that we're good. Right, now, here's some ground rules we have used. You can say at the end, this man is mad. Okay, I'm very happy. Lots of people do, especially my wife. But here's the rules we have set for ourselves. The first one is know your market and your place in it. The second is know your customers. The third is this wonderful expression, what is your customer's what's in it for me, or what's known as WIFIM. It's the head, as you said, Andy. It's the head. How are you going to get them on your side? What's your headline pitch, right? And what does that do for your pricing and business models? Okay, right. Here is our market, okay? We operate in supply chains, all right? Supply chains are marvelous places if you want to create jobs for people who suffer from disadvantage. And the reason for that is, there are any number of reasons. First of all, it's a whopping great market, okay? The graph you have in front of you is the seasonal labour market. But if you remember this thing here, it's not seasonal, by the way. Look at our April and October payroll numbers. The bottom box is the really interesting one. So in 2012, there were roughly 400,000 jobs in the seasonal, remember these aren't full-time jobs, these are seasonal jobs in elementary occupations. That is brilliant. They may not work for all of your beneficiaries, they're brilliant for my beneficiaries. We don't know how many of our people can't read, but we think it's around 30 to 40%. So they can't go for skilled labour. They can only go for these occupations. But everyone can use a shovel. So we know our market. It's big. We're not displacing any permanent jobs. It's year-round. It's a great place. So just to maybe take that away as a thought. Here's a sample of our client base. There's some surprising names on there. I'll come on to Interserve because they are somewhere around here.
Very small somewhere.
Yeah, but you'll see Amy, Veolia, Medway North, one or two of those, Virgin Active. There's a couple of real outliers there, which I won't really talk about because they're not really supply chain work. But Anya Hindmarsh sells some of the most expensive handbags in the country. Believe it or not, now you can come back and ask us about that. What we do there is exactly what we do in supply chains. It's just the most basic part of her supply chain. So we sort of know our market and we love our market. Not everyone loves our market, but we love our market. So let's talk about knowing and cherishing your customer base. So we're jolly lucky in the timing. Who here thinks that client relationship management involves software? It's an often made mistake. All right. My view, simple, horribly arrogant probably, is if client relationship management is about software, you've got it wrong. All right. Client relationship management is knowing and cherishing your clients. And what we decided to do was look at our clients using certain matrices and measurements, and it's all at the bottom. But the two important things for us are how much commercial income they pay us and how many jobs how many people we can take on, because we are the employer. And we put it all together and we look at two types of clients. We've got those who pay us to do commercial work and those who pay us to reduce reoffending. We don't get paid much at the moment, but we're hoping that's going to change. And we have what we call the Blue Sky CRM 15. And you'll see that way out in front, or the number 3 in our top 10, it's like a hit parade, isn't it? Number 3 in our top 10 is a local authority. And number 7 is a local authority. And that's it. The rest are all businesses, which is an interesting thought, because one of the themes I've taken out of today is that social value comes from local authorities. It does. They're great places to procure, but if you want numbers, you've got to work through a different way. And I'm telling you, in my view, it's big business. Interserve, we haven't done anything with yet. We want to. You're missing out. You're at number 15 because of what we think you might be able to do for us on transforming rehabilitation. So here is understanding customer with him. What's in it for me? Why is the customer going to talk to us? So one of the benefits of me is I've sold a lot of people a lot of dodgy instruments when I was in the city. That gave me the chance to understand risk. And most ex-offender employment organisations get it wrong because they ask someone else to take what is the biggest risk, which is to employ people. And what we do is we employ the people. So we've immediately traded a risk because we've got the risk that everyone else is trying to lay off. So we've got something really powerful to offer. So and the second thing about what we do is it's relatively easy to explain. So senior executives will love the concept, but note, ops managers frequently hate it because they're driven by the bottom line. That's a little bit about what Andy was saying. We know some, it's not Interserve, it's none of the ones we mentioned, who've actively kept us off contracts. Now, give them value. The question I've got here is, why should I pay you to employ drug dealers in my parks? Said to me by a Hillingdon councillor before we went in. I said, well, look, they're there anyway. You can either have them working for me and I'll knacker them by the end of the day, or they could be there selling drugs. It's your call. They got it in an instant. All right? Now, fit yourself into their model. All right? Don't tell them. I've heard so many people who sell by saying, you've got to do it. Work out what they want. So we discovered one of the names on there has what they call a 9 box. It's like a balanced scorecard. You'll have seen those. They just have 9 squares rather than 4. We understood that social value and something about ex-offenders was in that 9 box. So we said, we're going to be in that 9 box in 2 years' time. And that's what we did. We just worked on being in the 9 box. We didn't really do anything else. And it paid huge dividends. I would say even better, help them to win business. If you can help someone to win business, you've got them. And I know people are worried about being used as window dressing. The people with the 9 box now put us in every local authority bid that goes in, which means that if we're successful, we know they want 2, 3, 4 people in a team that year. So social value does work, actually. And companies can deliver exactly what the local councillors want. And you will each have your own thing, which local councillors want. But number 7's the critical one, because 7, a biblical number, is the really important one. Only deliver quality. So if we screw up on a job, we go back and fix it up in our time, at our cost. And that means that we get more money. And we're getting repeat business now. So it is harder for us to win business than it is for us to win repeat business. Just some thoughts on the headline pitch. Stand out from the crowd, okay? So we've used this line, the only company in the country where you need a criminal record to work there. We used it from day one, interestingly. We used it enough that David Cameron used it in a speech. So now we can quote him using it. It stands out. Don't be afraid of humour. People want to have a laugh, okay? And some people do things which I fully admit involve real distress. And so I'm not trying to make light of it. But if you can make things funny, people get it, particularly in some of the areas where we operate. Show you understand this thing about risk appetite. It looks really difficult to employ ex-offenders. It's really easy for us to do it. Know your pricing in advance. How much are we going to pay? He's going to ask me, how much are you going to charge on your jobs? I'm going to say, depending where it is, but it's probably about $8.50 an hour. I know that. He can take that away. He'll go and compare it with the market. He'll see we're competitive. Then all I've got to do is deliver a better job. Oh, and some business for him. So this next question, how can you help them win business? They want to win business. They're fundamentally different from a social enterprise, however well-intentioned they are. Their stakeholders primarily are their shareholders. So the bottom line matters. Show them how you're going to help them win business. And what social value does the customer create? Make that story easy. You know, I've just told him that next time he puts in a pitch, the local councillors are going to love the fact that the drug dealers are working for me and him and not in the park selling drugs. And finally, who gets the credit? Do I get the credit? No, he does. Give them...
I'm liking this more and more.
I know you are. Pricing a business...
20 minutes to close the deal.
Pricing a business model. No. We will. You're in our crosshairs. Pricing of business models. Look, the vast majority of social enterprise have a reliance, and this is the end of it. So no one's fallen asleep, I'm pleased. The vast majority of social enterprise have a reliance on some element of statutory or charitable income, okay? And I remember I'd set up when I got this going, I thought it was all going to wash its face because I didn't know what my pricing was, okay? They didn't understand. So, you know, I need about £12.50 an hour to pay for everything. I can only charge myself out at £8.50 an hour. I've got a gap, right? It's pretty obvious. So what I would say is, and I took my problem, I've set up a social enterprise and it doesn't wash its face, to that lovely man, Nigel Kershaw, who runs the Big Issue. And he turned around to me and he said, you know, can you raise the money somewhere else? So I said, yes, I can. He said, fine, go and do it. Time's up. And he was off. So just think about the impact of your commercial pricing on your business model, because it will have an impact. I put this graph at the bottom because I made this point earlier that, you know, my employees pay twice in income tax what the government gives us to reduce reoffending, which we hope is about to change. But we have a problem. At the moment, we have more business coming in than we can cope with. And to be able to cope with it, we need to earn more statutory income. And that puts it there. Mercifully, we hope transforming rehabilitation will change that. Because, another little bit of our working in the 9 box, we lobbied very hard to ensure that these large companies like Interserve, who win large contracts, make some sort of commitment to employing ex-offenders where they win that business. So we anticipate that we will pick up some money. Whether it's back to the heady days of 2007 when money was plentiful, who knows? But we would anticipate that we would shortly be paid for reducing reoffending rather than paying the government for doing it. That's me.
Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you to Andy and Paul as well. So, if those of you who have got internet connection and can tweet, what I'd like to see if we can try and do is throughout kind of this next discussion for the next 15 minutes or so, actually if there are great tips that kind of you're thinking or hearing or you want to share. There was a hashtag there.
Something uplifting from Theodore Roosevelt.
You can tweet that as well if you want to, but the hashtag SV Summit, if you want to be tweeting your tips on engaging with private business or engaging with social enterprise. So, open to questions. There are apparently 2 microphones, although, okay, we have a person with a microphone as well. If I can just remind you, if you can, don't start speaking until you've got the microphone for the benefit of our listeners and watchers in Australia, as Andy pointed out. If you can say kind of, if you're comfortable saying actually kind of where you're from and the organisation that you're from, keep it short. If you ramble, I will cut you off. And actually kind of say actually if your question is for all 3 or targeted at a particular member of our panel. All right, hands up. Okay, gentleman there.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name's Colin Downey from the Wild Hearts Group. I'm the sales director in Wild Hearts. Lots of comments were similar there from the panel. This is a question that anybody, I think, can answer, but Andy, there was something you said that was particularly relevant to me. It's about breaking the cycle of incumbency. I can regularly demonstrate competitiveness, I can regularly demonstrate quality of product and deliverables, and I can easily demonstrate the social impact, although that is a little bit more intangible. So I can convince companies, I think, that on a par we're as good as anybody else in the marketplace, but apathy and changing that cycle of incumbent suppliers, I find a real challenge. You mentioned Landmark, are a customer of ours, actually, which is great. So if we're 50-50 or it's head-to-head, but there's a social impact, Landmark had a policy to buy social. I think we need to see more policies in private business that says when it's on an equal playing field, we will switch. It's that switching I find quite difficult to motivate companies. Have you got any thoughts on that and how we get big business to be less apathetic about changing suppliers and moving more social?
And it'd be good to hear that, and also actually pause your perspective as well on that.
Very quickly then, sometimes you have to change policy, absolutely. And I guess we see that in a lot of legislation that comes in. If the market doesn't do it and apathy doesn't allow it, and you know that it's an output you want, you have to change policy. So we will be doing some work in Interserve and have started that work to say how we can procure more effectively. And part of that is meeting people, understanding what they've got to offer. Are the forums there available? And then do our policy, practice, processes allow that? If I'm to put my big business hat on, and also if you widen that to a social enterprise bidding for a job that might be done by another organisation that's not a social enterprise, who might be the incumbent, again, it's all about any customer, including a business-to-business transaction. We see risk. We see risk in that downturn in performance as we switch suppliers, in the same way that most of our clients will see a downturn in performance if they buy from another organisation that isn't the incumbent, either whether Interserve's replacing them or we're being replaced. And it's one, as an incumbent, you draw a nice little line and you show them how you're going to carry on that continuous improvement route, but that by nature, when you switch and make a change, there's a drop, there's a risk. So I'll kind of draw my answer to a conclusion by saying I think we need to change policy to support. I think we need to be able to meet and talk about what you have to offer. I'm not sure those channels exist. And you need to explain how you mitigate that risk of a change in supplier.
Okay.
Yeah, very similar. Businesses find it expensive and increases risk to change supplier. But we also, as an organisation, business and the community, we do see it's important that companies try to increase the number of small businesses and social enterprise in the supply chain. It's something we're working on. It's something we work on through our enterprise leadership team, of which Interserve do sit on that team. And so one of the things we're doing is called the Access Pledge, and basically getting companies to pledge to a certain percentage of their supply chain, which will be small businesses. And you think about, you're targeting companies like targets. So how are we going to change behaviour of companies? You set them targets. So Waits talked about setting a target for themselves of 1% of their supply chain will be small businesses. I talk about Fujitsu and the exact number, but Fujitsu, I think Fujitsu supply chain, 46% of them are small businesses, which is about 21% of their total spend is with small businesses. And so, but their target isn't to stay at 46%, it's to go 50%. And so they recognise that there's a benefit and there's a social element to trying to increase the number of small business in the supply chain, but also they recognise that they get more innovation from small business than they do from big business. So actually, although you've got to manage the risk and the cost, you can also increase innovation into your supply chain, which can mitigate some of those risks. But it's a challenge, and this is a backdrop over the last 10 years of where most businesses have been reducing the number of organisations in the supply chain, and it's the front of most CSC annual reports is the number of suppliers people have got. And so one of the things is how you make sure that you are accessing, you might not be able to access Interserve supply chain directly, but are Interserve putting the framework in place for you to access one of their suppliers. And so it's how you get into different tiers of the supply chain.
Just that made me think, one of the things very quickly, for all social enterprises, choose your ground very carefully, choose where you compete. Because following on from that, there are some parts of the supply chain that are so commoditized. How do you compete with a Wolseley or a Travis Perkins? This is a standard item. They can get it in bulk. They've got a buying power you can't believe, and they can offer us a price that you can't believe. So unless in some other way you might be have a regional footprint that they can't achieve, then when we're looking for a national deal, we want to use local suppliers, but it's a really different dynamic when you're up against competition for a place in our supply chain against somebody who's selling a hugely commoditized product which they can get a volume discount. So services are slightly different, service provider here, as opposed to commodity provider. So, sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah, Kate, my question's to Paul mainly, because I know Andy will know the answer from Andy, but it's Richard Williams from NCVO. Paul, some of the organisations, some of the big corporates actually are actively helping to build the capacity of their supply chain. I mean, how many organisations are doing that? And in a way, it goes back to Mick's point almost, that they need, to some extent, a mixed income line. And some of that income line may be about building their capacity, because I think your point, Andy, is very well made, but a lot of social enterprises are very small, and actually having that ability to understand how they compete, and given the government don't want to actually offer any support in that area, how many of the private sector and what are they doing to actually do that?
So, I mean, it's how long is a piece of string. I think it's very, very difficult to know the figures, but I certainly do think that companies are looking to support their supply chain. I think of a number of companies. Fujitsu I just mentioned as one, and it's just something. I think Carillion also do a registration where they pay suppliers quicker with whether they're registered. So and certainly other organisations in certain sectors where they use a large number of suppliers, they do that. I think the big thing is through the tiers of supply chain, as I mentioned before.
Okay. But Mick had a point. I don't know whether you want to share it or not.
Well, it was addressing that. It was addressing your point. I mean, when we first started out, I mean, I almost used blackmail to win work. I'm serious. I mean, I told Kate a couple of examples, and she couldn't repeat them. But here's what we do. All right. But here's what we have often done. So you will know I mean, somebody said earlier that somebody said something slightly disparaging about local government officers, didn't they? You know what local government officers are like. I love local government officers. They're fantastic. You can read a local authority from its website. You know who does what. Who are the first people who took a risk on us? It was local authorities, because they wanted the drug dealers out of their parks. So local authorities love social enterprises. Who puts out the commissions? Local authorities. Who wants those commissions? Big business. So what we have done for 8 or 9 years now is we've gone round our local authorities and we've explained to them the benefits they're getting and said to them, not put blue sky in the commission, in the procurement, the IPP, but put social enterprise in. And it's amazing how effective it is. It is amazing. So, I mean, that would be my tip. I mean, and it's a huge advantage. I've just given the shareholders of Interserve an enormous advantage because they're better placed than anyone else. So everyone wins from this. But what will make business change is money. And if they've got a better route through to that commission, then they'll go there. So I would start lobbying. Get a couple of local councillors on your board. It's amazing how easy it is.
Do we have any other social enterprises in the room who'd like to share some of their experience of winning business through social value? Or anything that reflections on what Mick has said is from his experience? Or any other questions? Yep, over here.
Thank you. I'm Tom Levitt, author of Welcome to Good Co, using the tools of business to create public benefit, which is why I didn't put my hand up earlier on, because I didn't fall into any of your categories. Okay. Paul, you mentioned Fujitsu. They used a tool called Trading for Good to do an impact analysis of their entire supply chain. Trading for Good is a fairly rough and ready sort of tool, but and I know there's another workshop going on about impact measurement, but how important is it that there is a common single form of measurement which business can use? I'm thinking perhaps of the benefit corporation criteria. But there are 200 tick boxes to go through, which seems to be not attractive to business. So you can either have simplicity or you can have detail. But at the end of the day, because people procure for different reasons, I think you need to have a wide variety and some subjectivity as well in measuring impact.
Paul, perhaps if you could answer that, and Andy, then also I'd like Mick's perspective on actually kind of how your social value measurement has impacted on, socially impacted, but impacted on kind of your business growth as well. But Paul, if you start.
It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because simplicity will make it too simple, and complexity will kill it. And one of the things that's talked about is, do we want to create a whole new accounting methodology that goes with social value? And actually, I don't think that's where people want to get to, although perhaps it is. I mean, the thing is, one of the things the BITC talks about a lot is materiality, and obviously something that needs to be material to the business or to the whoever is procuring, you know. So whatever you're asking for, whatever the social value you're asking to measure, has to be material either to the business or to the local authority in which your boundaries in which you're working in. So, but the thing about trading for good, and trading for good is rough and ready, but it does ask some fairly simple things which you can start to ask around apprenticeships, around local suppliers and things like that, and some fairly simple metrics. And one of these things is actually, it will be simplistic, but actually we've got to start, and we are starting, and lots of companies are starting, and have done quite a lot of work on this. But in order to make it relevant, you've got to start somewhere. In order to make it work, you've got to start somewhere. And so for me, it's trading for good is good because it's simple. I mean, one of the things I worry a lot about social value, and this was talked about from a gentleman from Fujitsu with me at our recent leadership team, was that he worries that social value will create a barrier to small businesses entering a lot of supply chains, because you put so much stuff around it, and actually you spend so much time answering questionnaires and trying to measure the difference that you're not actually making the difference you can do, and you make yourself. It could actually create more barriers for small businesses than it helps to create social value, and that's one of the big worries that I think that I share with the gentleman from Fujitsu.
Andy?
Very simply, you've hit the nail on the head. General Officer commanding 1st United Kingdom Armoured Division when I was a lowly staff officer was a chap called Roddy Cordy Simpson, I think his name was. And he shouted down the radio once to his brigade commanders, "If I wait for every last duck to be lined up nice and neatly, we'll never get this attack done," or similar. And it's true now. If we wait and wait and wait, we'll never get anywhere. So some simple metrics which are easily available or manageable. Come and talk to us about your approach, because if you look people in the eye and they can explain their journey, almost write down all you know about this. What are you going to do for us? Unfortunately, it becomes more subjective rather than objective, and it involves a dialogue, whereas some people are involved in just very transactional arrangements. So it doesn't always help, but certainly for larger procurements, I'd like to see it move in that way. And then I believe that local authorities and people like that could easily manage that. It ain't perfect, the ducks aren't all in a row, but we need to start moving.
Your social impact measurement, how does it help? Does it help you? Is it the data, versus the stories? Does it help you?
I think impact measurement is where accounting was before they learned how to value goodwill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I think, and I think until you crack that, you won't have a universally used measurement tool, and everyone can laugh at it, which is, I think, the worry. So ultimately, who buys our impact measurements? Well, it's people like Interserve when they're putting in bids, but that's because they're selling it to the local authorities who want to see, only 1 in 6 of their miscreants reoffend. So that's who buys it. But and also the government tends to buy it. Commissioners tend to buy it, but they're not very good at paying for it. So we've got all this data, and it's helpful at the edge, but only at the edge. I mean, I think the greatest thing about social impact, by the way, if you run a social enterprise, is that it affirms what you do. I mean, I can think of a few organisations that do stuff that isn't actually terribly helpful. Usually not social enterprises, but certainly some charities that do things that, isn't terribly helpful. And if you are working in the voluntary sector when you could be working in the private sector, my 2 rules are A, you've got to have fun, and B, it's got to be meaningful. And if it isn't meaningful, you might as well stop.
Okay, folks, we have run out of time, and it is quite hot in here. Is it hot? Oh no, it's terrible, isn't it? If you'll join me in thanking our panel, and then you can make your way to caffeine. So.